If any call it my pride to think that any ministers or students are so raw as to need anything that I can add to them, let him but pardon me for saying that such demure pleadings for a feigned humility shall not draw me to a confederacy with blindness, hypocrisy, and sloth, and I will pardon him for his charge of pride. It is long ago since many foreign divines subscribed the request that the English would have them in Latin, as some of our practical theology, which Mr. Dury sent over, and 12 great divines of ours wrote to Bishop Ussher, as Dr. Bernard tells you in his life, to draw them up a form of method, but it was never done among them all, and it is said that Bishop Downame, at last undertaken it, died in the attempt. Had this been done, it is like my labor might have been spared. But being undone, I have thus made this essay. But I have been necessitated to leave out much about conversion, mortification, self-denial, self-acquaintance, faith, justification, judgment, glory, etc., because I had written on them all before. 2. And I thought it is not unuseful to the more judicious masters of families, who may choose and read such parcels to their families, as at any time the case requireth. And indeed I began it rudely, with an intention of that plainness and brevity which families require. But finding that it swelled to a bigger bulk than I intended, I was fain to write my life of faith as a breviate and substitute to the families and persons that cannot have and use so large a volume, presupposing my directions for sound conversion, for weak Christians, and for peace of conscience printed long ago. And to private Christians I thought it not in vain to have at hand so universal a directory and resolution of doubts, not expecting that they remember all, but may on every occasion turn to such particulars as they most need. But I must expect to be assaulted with these objections, and it is not only profane deriders and malignant enemies that are used by Satan to vilify and oppose our service to God. Objection 1. You have written too many books already. Who do you think has so little to do as to read them all? Is it not pride and self-conceitedness to think that your scribblings are worthy to be read, and that the world hath need of so much of your instructions, as if there were no wise men but you? You have given offense already by your writings. You should write less and preach more. Answer 1. I have seldom, if ever, in all my ministry omitted one sermon for all my writings. I was not able to live in London, nor ride abroad, but through God's mercy I seldom omitted any opportunities at home. 2. If I preach the same doctrine that I write, why should not men be as angry with me for preaching it as for writing it? But if it be good and true, why it is not as good preached by the press to many thousands, and for many years after I am dead, as to preach to a parlor full for a few hours? Or why is not both as good as one? 3. I will not take the reverend objector to be ignorant that writing and publishing the word of God by it is preaching it, and the most public preaching, and had the example of the apostles and evangelists as well as speaking, and one is no more appropriate to them than the other. Though the extraordinaries of both be proper to them, and do not receive what self-condemning contradiction it is, at the same time to cry out against those that dissuade you from preaching or hinder you, and tell you it is needless, and you are proud to think that the world needeth your preaching, and yet you yourself to say the very same against your brethren's preaching by the press. I know an ignorant, illiterate sectary might say, writing is no preaching, and you are called to preach and not to write. But I must reverence you more than to suppose you so absurd. Other men forbid you but less public preaching, and you reproach me for more public preaching. That is the difference. How hard is it to know what spirit we are of? Did you think that you had been patrons of idleness and silencers of ministers, while you declaim so much against it? Your pretense that you would have me preach more is feigned. Are you sure that you preach oftener than I do? When I persuaded ministers heretofore to catechize and instruct all their parishes personally, family by family, you said it was more toil than was our duty. And now you are against much writing too, and yet would be thought laborious ministers. And as to the number and length of my writings, It is my own labor that maketh them so, and my own great trouble that the world cannot be sufficiently instructed and edified in fewer words, but one. Would not all your sermons set together be as long? And why is not much and long preaching blamable, if long writings be? Are not the works of Augustine and Chrysostom much longer? Who yet hath reproached Aquinas of Suarez, Calvin of Zanchi, etc., for the number and greatness of their volumes they have written? Why do you contradict yourselves by affecting great libraries? 3. When did I ever persuade any one of you to buy or read any book of mine? What harm will they do to those that let them alone? Or what harm can it do you for other men to read them? Let them be to you as if they had never been written, and it will be nothing to you how many they are. If all others take not you for their tutors, to choose for them the books that they must read, that is not my doing, but their own. If they err in taking themselves to be fitter judges than you, what tendeth most to their own edification, why do you not teach them better? 4. Either it is God's truth or error which I write. If error, why doth no one of you show so much charity as by word or writing to instruct me better, not evince it to my face, but do all to others by backbiting? If truth, what harm will it do? If men had not leisure to read our writings, the booksellers would silence us and save you the labor, for none would print them. 5. But who can please all men? Whilst a few of you cry out of too much. What if 20 or 100 for one be yet for more? How shall I know whether you or they be the wiser and the better men? Readers, you see on what terms we must do the work of God. Our slothful flesh is backward, and weary of so much labor. Malignant enemies of piety are against it all. Some slothful brethren think it necessary to cloak their fleshly ease by vilifying the diligence of others. Many sects whom we oppose think it the interest of their cause, which they call God's cause, to make all that is said against them seem vain, contemptible, and odious, which because they cannot do by confutation, they will do by backbiting and confident chat. And one or two reverend brethren have by the wisdom described exactly James 3:15-16 arrived by the liberty of backbiting and magisterial sentences the works of others, which they confess they never read, that their reputation of being most learned, orthodox, worthy divines may keep the chair at easier rates than the wasting of their flesh in unwearied labors to know the truth and communicate it to the world. And some are angry who are forward to write that the booksellers and readers silence not others as well as them. Objection 2. Your writings differing from the common judgment have already caused offense to the godly. Answer 1. To the godly that were of a contrary opinion only, sores that will not be healed used to be exasperated by the medicine. 2. It was none but healing, pacificatory writings that have caused that offense. 3. Have not those dissenters' writings more offended the godly that were against them? They have but one trick to honor their denial, which more dishonoreth it, even by unsanctifying those that are not of their minds. 4. If God bless me with opportunity and help, I will offend such men much more by endeavoring further than ever I have done, the quenching of that fire which they are still blowing up, and detecting the folly and mischief of those logomachies by which they militate against love and concord, and inflame and tear the church of God, and let them know that I am about it. But some pastors as well as people have the weakness to think that all our preachings and writings must be brought under their dominion and to their bar, by the bare saying that we offend the godly, that is, those of the opinion which they falsely call by the name of scandal. 5. But I think they will find little controversy to offend them in this book.